Powered by the Montana Television Network. This is the 10 o'clock news on Q2, Montana's news leader.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us this Monday. I'm Jeanelle Slade.
And I'm Russ Riesinger. A project that has been kicked around since the 1990s is getting new attention as Billings grows and traffic increases.
The proposed inner belt loop would connect the end of Wicks Lane in the Billings Heights to the top of Zimmerman Trail, allowing westbound motorists to bypass downtown Billings.
Well, tonight, the Billings City Council heard an engineering report looking at how the city could use the land around that route.
With a $14 million price tag, the inner belt loop could open up about 2,000 acres for development on the west end of the Billings Heights. Now, the study looked at what it would take to bring water and sewer out to possible development. It found that sewer and water lines could be run, but elevation changes that raise water pressure could also raise the cost of construction.
The study also found that with the addition of a new fire station, first responders could still service most of the inner belt loop within 4 minutes. Well, the city's in the process of applying for a federal grant that would reduce its contribution to the cost significantly.
Next, public meetings and further studies will be held to gather more information about traffic numbers.
Well, a heads up for Billings drivers for the next year. North and South 27th Street downtown Billings will soon see the first part of a major improvement project.
The Montana Department of Transportation is set to spend about $13 million upgrading traffic signals, pedestrian crossings, and new pavement from end to end. Q2's Mitch Laggy is standing by now with details. Mitch.
Russ and Jeanelle, this project was originally slated to start back in July, but there was only one manufacturer that makes the new streetlights, so the Department of Transportation had to wait. Now, starting next week, crews will start work on replacing the old traffic signals and improving pedestrian crossings. At the tail end of this year's construction season, MDT expects to replace the lights and pedestrian crossings from the South 27th Street on-ramp to the 4th Avenue South. Picking up next spring, crews will pave the entirety of South 27th from Airport Road to the South 27th on-ramp. Drivers in Billings should expect some short delays during the construction.
There'll be some delays. 0 to 15 minutes is about the most, but there'll be two-way traffic the entire time through the entire project. There'll be access to every business, either through the front or the back, but every business will still have access. All the approaches will have access.
Construction is slated to start next week and go until the snow hits. Work will pick back up in the spring with an expected completion date of October 2020.
All right, thanks so much, Mitch.
Well, President Trump pointing fingers at Iran for twin attacks on Saudi oil facilities, but the commander-in-chief walked back initial threats of military action against the country.
Katherine Johnson reports from the White House, where the president also downplayed concerns about rising gas prices.
Well, it's looking that way.
At the White House Monday, President Trump said it looks like Iran was behind debilitating attacks on 2 Saudi oil facilities over the weekend, knocking out half the kingdom's oil output and causing the biggest oil disruption in history. Iranian-backed Houthi rebels engaged in a civil war in Yemen claimed responsibility, but the president said he does not want war.
I'd like to avoid it.
That's a step back from the president's earlier hints at military action with a tweet Sunday that the U.S. is, quote, locked and loaded. President Trump said he made no promise to protect Saudi Arabia.
That was an attack on Saudi Arabia, and that wasn't an attack on us. But we would certainly help them. They've been a great ally.
Republican Senator Mitt Romney tweeted that direct military engagement would be a grave mistake, and Democrats are urging restraint.
There's no circumstance right now where a war with Iran would be a good idea.
I think that diplomatic resolution is what needs to happen.
The administration's top diplomat, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, heads to Saudi Arabia on Tuesday. Here at home, there's concern the disruption might cost Americans more at the pump. Oil prices jumped more than 14% Monday.
The quicker this output is restored, the less of an impact to motorists.
President Trump downplayed those effects and said the U.S. is prepared to dip into strategic oil reserves if necessary. Katherine Johnson, CBS News, the White House.
Well, filling up with gasoline sooner than later this week will be in your best interest. That's because gas prices are predicted to jump by as much as 30 cents a gallon as a result of Sunday's attack. Now, the attack already sent oil futures soaring this morning on the New York Mercantile Exchange. Experts at GasBuddy.com say expect higher prices between 15 to 30 cents a gallon at local gas stations as early as Tuesday or Wednesday. Crude oil prices at $70 a barrel will likely push pump prices into the $3 a gallon range. According to GasBuddy, Billings last eclipsed $3 a gallon in November 2014.
Zoo Montana making a big announcement today that it is once again accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Q2's Zoe Zandora has more on why that accreditation is so important for our state's only zoo.
It's humbling and sometimes it's overwhelming to how much this community has come together for us.
Jeff Ewelt, the executive director of Zoo Montana, emotional as a day like today comes after some grueling years of peaks and valleys for Zoo Montana, fighting to get the AZA, or the Association of Zoo and Aquariums, recognition after losing it 8 years ago.
It was embarrassing. We had lost respect of the community, so it just wasn't a good time here.
AZA is the primary accrediting body for zoos and aquariums in the United States and has been for more than 40 years. U.S. agencies such as OSHA and the USDA consider AZA standards as the national standard when evaluating institutions.
I'm a big believer every good city needs a good zoo, and so when Zoo Montana started having the issues it did, I didn't want to see it go to the wayside.
Zoo Montana has had its peaks and valleys in its 25 years, and in 2011, the zoo lost its AZA accreditation due to the lack of financial stability. Zoo Montana was inspected by the AZA once again in May of 2019, and after evaluation, Ewelt says they finally have their golden stamp of approval back.
It's been 8 long years since Jeff Ewelt and his team have been slowly chipping away to get the AZA accreditation back for Zoo Montana. And as far as Ewelt's concerned, he's going to try hard to never let that golden stamp of approval ever get taken away from the zoo again.
Ewelt says the biggest obstacle he believes for Zoo Montana is the finances, things like public support in the way of a tax levy or a bond. But he says they aren't using that as an excuse.
Not making excuses for who we are. The biggest obstacle, though, is that funding and just getting folks to understand that we grow a lot slower than some of the other big city zoos. And that's because we don't have that check coming in every year from the city or the government. 8 years, I had this vision that we'd be here, and I didn't think 8 years it was going to take, but it did. It took a little longer than we wanted. But regardless, we're here. And for me, it's a personal victory and something that I'm so incredibly proud of.
In Billings, Zoe Zandora, MTN News.
All right, thank you, Zoe. And with accreditation, Ewelt says Zoo Montana is focused on future conservation projects and will continue plenty of community events and involvement.
And turning to weather, Bob, we had a record-setting day, but it was a one-day-only sale.
I'm afraid that's the case. We're technically still in summer. We've got another week of summer. I think the autumnal equinox is next week. But let me show you. We wound up with a high temperature today of 94 degrees. Now, we were wondering how late into September do we occasionally see 90s? And basically, 1963, you go all the way to the last day of September, the 30th, we had 90 degrees on that day, and even had to go into October 4th of 1963. We had 90 degrees on that day as well. So yeah, it can be kind of hot this time of year, but I think after this we're going to probably start to see temperatures start to roll back down to the 70s and the 80s. Probably it's going to be one of the situations where 90s will be the exception rather than the rule. And we'll have more about the rest of the week's forecast, a little bit cooler, coming up in a few more minutes.
All right, thanks, Bob.
Well, if you haven't turned on your heat or had a fire to warm things up yet, probably won't be too long now until you do.
Before the temperatures tumble, now is the time to make sure your elements of heating are ready to fire up.
Yes, it still is summer, and yes, you probably needed your air conditioning last weekend, but you know what's coming sooner rather than later. Cold weather where you'll need to turn up the heat.
Get your heating appliances checked out. Make sure that they're fully ready to go, functional. Look at your vents on your roof. Make sure your vents are in a good location. Make sure they're not obstructed.
Besides a furnace or electric heat, wood stoves are still common and need to be checked every year at this time.
Wood-burning stoves, make sure that you have somebody who's qualified come clean the chimney out. Build up from using it last year, bird's nests, all kinds of things in there. Make sure the chimney's cleaned out.
Space heaters are commonly used and commonly are the cause for house fires. Keep objects away from these heaters and remember to unplug them when leaving. This time of year is also a good time to examine other equipment that could mean the difference between life and death.
The smoke detectors and carbon monoxides, changing your batteries out, test them, make sure that they operate. If they're older than 10 years, replace them. That's usually what our standard is.
And now you're a little more weather-wise.
Coming up on tonight's 10 o'clock news, it's never too late to make sure your little one's car seat is safe. Find out how next.
Plus, could electric bikes be zipping through Glacier National Park? Look into the decision.
And later in sports, Scott shows us where your Cats and Grizz climb to in this week's Top 25.
You're watching MTN News with Jeanelle Slade and Russ Riesinger. Storm Tracker weather with Bob McGuire. And sports with Scott Breen. This is the 10 o'clock news on Q2, Montana's news leader.